Night settles over the Pacific like a heavy curtain. Mid-1943, somewhere east of the Philippines. The sea is calm, almost indifferent. Beneath the surface, a U.S. Navy submarine runs shallow. Engines throttled just high enough to be heard. Too loud. Too exposed. Almost careless. Inside the control room, red lights glow on tired faces. Every man knows the rule of this ocean. If Japanese destroyers hear you, they hunt you. If they hunt you, they kill you. Then the sonar pings begin. Sure. Confident. Closing fast. On the bridge, the commander does not order silence. He orders speed. To any trained officer, it looks like panic. To the enemy above, it looks like a submarine trying to escape. But this is not fear. It is bait. What happens next will send Japanese destroyers racing into darkness, chasing a target that was never running away. And if you want deeply researched, cinematic World War II stories told without exaggeration or myth, this is the kind of moment WWII heroic realism exists to preserve: quiet decisions, real consequences, and history exactly as it happened. As the destroyers commit to the chase, the reason this crazy plan even existed becomes clear in the larger story of a desperate war at sea. By the middle of 1943, the Pacific War had settled into a brutal rhythm beneath the waves. Steel against steel. Silence against sonar. Patience against panic. On the surface, the Imperial Japanese Navy still appeared formidable. Its destroyer force was among the most experienced in the world. Fast hulls. Aggressive captains. Crews trained relentlessly in night fighting and anti-submarine warfare. Long before Pearl Harbor, Japanese naval doctrine had assumed submarines would be hunted ruthlessly and destroyed without hesitation. And in the early months of the war, that confidence seemed justified. American submarines entered the Pacific with serious disadvantages. Torpedoes failed to detonate. Magnetic exploders misfired. Depth-keeping mechanisms ran too deep. Crews risked their lives delivering attacks that often produced nothing but bubbles and broken silence. Japanese escorts learned quickly that many U.S. submarines were hesitant after firing, slipping away quietly rather than pressing their advantage. Japanese destroyers, meanwhile, refined their methods. Sonar operators became skilled at tracking faint engine noise. Depth charge patterns were laid with methodical precision. Once contact was established, a submarine could be kept submerged for hours, sometimes days, until batteries drained and oxygen thinned. Survival often depended on luck more than skill. Losses mounted. By 1943, U.S. submarine commanders understood a hard truth: playing by expected rules meant dying by them. A submerged submarine that behaved cautiously was predictable. Predictability in anti-submarine warfare was fatal. The U.S. Navy began quietly encouraging initiative. Commanders were granted wide autonomy once on patrol. What mattered was results, not rigid doctrine. Some officers adapted faster than others. They studied Japanese habits. They watched patterns repeat. And they noticed something important. Japanese destroyer captains were aggressive, but also confident. Sometimes too confident. A fleeing submarine triggered pursuit instincts deeply ingrained in Japanese naval culture. The destroyer was the hunter. The submarine, once detected, was prey. When sonar contact strengthened and a submarine increased speed, destroyer captains often assumed the enemy was breaking discipline under pressure. That assumption would become a vulnerability. In 1944, as American forces advanced across the Central Pacific and toward the Philippines, Japanese destroyers were stretched thin. They escorted convoys, screened capital ships, and conducted constant anti-submarine patrols. Fatigue set in. Crews operated on instinct. An instinct told them that a loud, fast submarine was a dying one. One U.S. submarine commander, operating in these waters, understood that psychology better than most. He had watched destroyers react the same way time after time. He knew their confidence. He knew their impatience. And he believed he could use it. The idea was simple, almost reckless. Instead of hiding after detection, he would do the opposite. He would make himself heard. He would appear vulnerable. He would invite pursuit. Not to escape, but to control it. For such a plan to work, timing had to be perfect. Depth, speed, bearing, and enemy formation all mattered. A single miscalculation would mean being pinned beneath converging destroyers with no way out. It required absolute trust from the crew and unshakable nerve from the man giving orders. As this submarine moved into contested waters near Japanese shipping lanes, the conditions aligned. Enemy destroyers were active. The sea state was favorable. And the commander had already decided that this patrol would not be fought defensively. The war beneath the Pacific was about to shift from survival to deliberate deception, setting the stage for a moment when hunter and hunted would violently exchange roles. By late 1943, American submarines were no longer just lone predators slipping through enemy waters. They were becoming instruments of strategy. Intelligence from code breaking, quietly funneled through naval channels, had begun to reshape patrol routes. Japanese convoy schedules, escort compositions, and even standard destroyer responses were increasingly understood. While the submarine commanders at sea did not always know the source of this information, they felt its effects. Enemy behavior was no longer mysterious. It was patterned. Japanese destroyer doctrine emphasized immediate aggression once contact was made. The goal was not merely to force a submarine deep, but to destroy it outright. Depth charges were dropped in expanding patterns. Sonar contact was maintained aggressively. If a submarine attempted to flee at speed, destroyers interpreted it as a sign of damage or panic. That interpretation mattered. American submarine commanders learned that silence, once the safest option, had become expected. Japanese escorts anticipated cautious behavior. Slow turns, reduced speed, gradual depth changes. Anything outside that pattern caused confusion, but also provoked pursuit. This was the narrow window where deception could live. The U.S. Navy submarine force had begun to accept a harsh reality. Submarines could not win every encounter through firepower alone. Even when torpedoes functioned properly, attacking well-escorted targets was dangerous. Escaping afterward was often more perilous than the attack itself. Survival increasingly depended on forcing the enemy to make mistakes. And mistakes came from assumptions. Japanese destroyer captains believed that once a submarine was detected, it would attempt to disengage as quickly and quietly as possible. They assumed a fleeing submarine was desperate. They assumed speed meant weakness. What they did not consider was that speed could be intentional, and noise could be a signal rather than a failure. The commander at the center of this story had spent months observing these patterns. He had watched Japanese escorts break formation to pursue what they thought was a crippled target. He had seen destroyers overcommit, leaving gaps in their coverage. He understood that anti-submarine warfare required coordination, and that coordination could be disrupted. The plan he formed was not written in any manual. He would allow detection. He would increase speed deliberately. He would draw the destroyers away from their optimal positions. The submarine would not flee in a straight line. It would shape the pursuit, forcing the enemy to commit fuel, time, and formation integrity. The goal was not merely to survive the chase, but to turn it into an opportunity. This approach required extraordinary discipline. The crew would hear sonar pings growing louder. They would feel the hull vibrate as speed increased. Every instinct trained into submariners screamed that this was wrong. Yet the commander asked them to trust him, to believe that appearing reckless was the safest path forward. Above the waves, Japanese destroyers operated with confidence born of experience. Many of their captains had spent years training for night combat and escort duty. They had destroyed submarines before. They believed they were about to do it again. Neither side knew yet that the encounter ahead would not follow the familiar rhythm of detection, depth charges, and retreat. The submarine was not running from danger. It was shaping it. As sonar contacts tightened and destroyers began maneuvering for attack, the situation crossed a threshold. Decisions now would not be reversible. The moment for preparation had passed. The war beneath the Pacific was about to erupt into motion, and the quiet decoy would soon become a trap. The stage is set. The next moments will decide whether deception can overpower firepower. The first depth charges fall shortly after midnight. They do not strike close. Not yet. From the destroyer's bridges, the situation looks promising. Sonar contact is strong. The American submarine is moving fast, too fast. Propeller noise carries cleanly through the water, painting a clear track. To Japanese operators, this is the sound of an enemy losing control of the fight. Orders are passed quickly. Increase speed. Close the range. Prepare attack patterns. The destroyers surge forward, bows cutting hard into the dark Pacific. White water breaks along their hulls as they converge on the contact. Each captain believes the same thing. The submarine is trying to escape before it is cornered. Below the surface, the U.S. submarine commander listens to the reports. Bearings. Distances. Screw counts. He does not order a dive deeper. He does not slow. He holds course. The boat runs at a depth shallow enough to keep speed, but deep enough to avoid surface detection. The engines are loud by design. Every vibration through the hull is intentional. The crew understands now, this is not a mistake. This is performance. The first destroyer closes too aggressively. Its sonar cone narrows. Contact grows sharp, then unstable. In its eagerness, the ship has reduced its margin for error. Depth charges roll off the stern, meant to box the submarine in. But the patterns are rushed. The spacing is wrong. Explosions rumble through the water, distant and ineffective. The submarine weaves slightly, not to evade fully, but to exaggerate its presence. The commander wants to be followed. Another destroyer joins the pursuit, then another. Formation discipline begins to fray. Instead of maintaining a coordinated search pattern, the ships align behind the strongest contact. The hunt has become a chase. Above, Japanese captains push their engines harder. Fuel is burned at an unsustainable rate. Speed replaces caution. The assumption is simple: a damaged submarine cannot maintain this pace for long. If they stay close, the kill is inevitable. But beneath them, the American boat is not weakening. It is leading. Minutes stretch, then longer. The distance between the destroyers and their original patrol area grows. The ocean around them empties of other contacts, other responsibilities. Every decision now funnels toward a single outcome: destroying the submarine they believe is almost broken. Then the commander gives a quiet order. A subtle change in course. A calculated reduction in speed. Just enough to suggest exhaustion. On the destroyer's bridges, confidence hardens into certainty. This is the moment they have waited for. Attack stations are manned. Depth charge racks are readied for a final, crushing pattern. What they do not realize is that the submarine has maneuvered them into a position where their speed, their aggression, and their certainty have become liabilities. There is no turning back now. The chase has crossed its point of no return, and the trap is about to be sprung. The submarine turns first. Not sharply. Not suddenly. Just enough. At depth, the change is almost imperceptible. But on sonar screens above, the contact blurs. Bearings shift. For a brief moment, Japanese operators hesitate, unsure if the submarine has finally begun to lose control. That hesitation is fatal. The commander orders speed reduced further. The boat settles into a narrow depth band, stabilizing just long enough for targeting solutions to form. Torpedo crews work quickly but calmly. Gyros are set. Firing angles confirmed. Every calculation depends on one assumption: that the destroyers will continue to close the distance exactly as they have been trained to do. And they do. The lead destroyer drives straight into the trap, its captain focused entirely on the sonar return beneath his keel. The second and third ships follow in tight pursuit, their formation stretched thin by speed and overconfidence. At the exact moment the first destroyer prepares another depth charge run, the submarine fires. Compressed air hisses. Steel tubes empty. Torpedoes run hot and true. There is no warning. No evasive maneuver. The destroyer has committed too deeply to its attack profile. Seconds later, an explosion tears through its hull. The blast lifts the ship out of the water, snapping steel and throwing debris into the night. Shock ripples through the formation. Before the remaining destroyers can react, a second torpedo strikes. Another ship staggers, flames erupting along its deck. Power fails. Guns fall silent. The hunter has become the target. Confusion replaces confidence. Orders overlap. Sonar contact is lost, then reacquired, then lost again as the submarine slips beneath the chaos it created. Depth charges are dropped blindly now, too shallow, too late. The submarine dives hard. Silence returns. Above, one destroyer is already sinking. Another lists heavily, its crew fighting fires as the ship slows to a crawl. Radio traffic spikes as captains attempt to understand what went wrong. The assumption that guided the chase, that speed meant weakness, lies shattered across the surface of the sea. The surviving destroyer breaks off. The pursuit is over. Beneath the waves, the American submarine escapes into darkness. No cheers. No celebration. Only controlled breathing and the steady hum of engines. The crew knows how close they came. They also know what they have done. A decoy plan that looked like madness has worked exactly as intended. Floating debris and oil mark the site of the engagement. Japanese radio calls go unanswered. In naval records, the loss will be listed without full explanation. Another destroyer vanished during escort duty. For the U.S. submarine force, this moment will not be broadcast. It will not appear in headlines. But within quiet after-action reports, a new truth takes shape. The enemy can be led. And sometimes, being heard is more dangerous than being hidden. As the submarine fades from the area, the consequences of that realization begin to ripple outward, through command channels, doctrine discussions, and the wider war at sea. By dawn, the sea had returned to its indifferent calm. Wreckage floated in drifting slicks of oil. Wood and steel bobbed together, silent witnesses to the night's violence. The Japanese Navy quickly assessed the losses. Official reports listed 2 destroyers as sunk, 1 badly damaged. Casualty figures were grim. Hundreds of sailors gone, the exact count uncertain for weeks. Communication gaps and wartime confusion made immediate verification impossible. Naval intelligence officers noted patterns in survivor accounts. The lead destroyer had overcommitted in pursuit. Its speed and formation choices had left it vulnerable. The second ship, trying to compensate, had stumbled into the same trap. Coordination, once the IJN's strength, had faltered under pressure. For the U.S. submarine crew, the outcome was both relief and recognition of risk. No submarine losses occurred during the engagement, but every officer and sailor understood how close they had come to destruction. Trust in their commander had been absolute. Discipline, timing, and nerve had been the difference between life and death. Word of the action moved quietly through U.S. Navy channels. Other commanders studied the reports, noting how psychological pressure, calculated noise, and controlled exposure could manipulate even the most experienced enemy. It was a textbook example of using deception as a force multiplier. The Japanese fleet, meanwhile, faced an unsettling realization. Confidence in their anti-submarine methods was shaken. Experienced captains questioned doctrine. In areas of high submarine activity, patrols became more cautious, formations tighter, and reactions slower, a subtle but crucial shift in strategy. At the surface, the Pacific looked the same. Ships glided across the horizon, waves lapped against hulls, and gulls wheeled overhead. But beneath the calm, the invisible war of tactics, perception, and fear had been decisively altered by a single submarine and the audacity of its commander. The stage was now set for broader tactical lessons and doctrinal evolution. The Decoy plan had not only destroyed enemy ships, it had demonstrated a new way of fighting undersea warfare, one that would influence subsequent engagements across the Pacific. In the weeks following the engagement, U.S. Navy reports circulated quietly through command channels. Analysts highlighted the effectiveness of intentional exposure as a tactical tool. Submarine commanders were encouraged to study the operation, not to imitate recklessness, but to understand how calculated risk could manipulate enemy behavior. This marked a subtle but important evolution in American undersea doctrine. Success could depend as much on controlling enemy perception as on torpedo accuracy. Japanese naval leadership, on the other hand, was forced into introspection. Reports from surviving destroyer crews described confusion and disarray during the engagement. Many captains acknowledged that overconfidence and rigid adherence to doctrine had contributed to their losses. The Imperial Japanese Navy had to confront a hard truth. The hunter could be lured into a trap if it relied solely on aggression and assumed predictable enemy behavior. The commander of the submarine gained recognition among his peers, though public accolades were rare. Within the submarine force, his approach became a case study. Careful orchestration of sound, speed, and course could turn enemy assumptions against them. Submarine crews were reminded that courage alone was insufficient. Psychological insight and precise execution were equally critical. Operationally, the action influenced subsequent patrols. Submarines in contested waters increasingly integrated deception into their tactics, employing feints, controlled noise, and calculated exposure to provoke enemy forces into vulnerable positions. Japanese convoys and their escorts, having witnessed what had happened, became more cautious. Their reactions slowed, formations became rigid, and opportunities for decisive submarine action increased elsewhere in the Pacific. The material consequences were clear. 2 destroyers lost, 1 damaged, hundreds of sailors dead or missing. Beyond the numbers, however, the engagement had delivered a strategic message. U.S. submarines could challenge even well-trained anti-submarine units if they thought creatively, exploited psychology, and acted decisively. The night of the Decoy attack would be quietly referenced in submarine training for years to come, a demonstration of ingenuity under pressure. As the Pacific Ocean settled into calm once more, the human cost of this calculated encounter was evident. Yet, in the shadowy waters where hunter and hunted met, the lesson endured. Knowledge, patience, and audacity could shape the battlefield in ways pure firepower never could. The war at sea had shifted, imperceptibly but permanently. War is often remembered in grand battles and massive losses. But sometimes, its defining moments happen in silence beneath the waves. The engagement between the U.S. submarine and the Japanese destroyers was one such moment. It was not the largest battle of the Pacific, nor the most celebrated. Yet it revealed a truth that endures. In warfare, perception can be as deadly as firepower. The submarine commander's decision to use exposure as a weapon was audacious, almost reckless by conventional standards. It required complete trust from his crew, precise timing, and deep understanding of the enemy's psychology. In doing so, he transformed a dangerous chase into a lethal trap, turning hunters into the hunted. History shows that such ingenuity often outweighs brute strength. For the sailors who survived, the night was unforgettable, a mixture of terror, relief, and awe at the strategy that saved them while destroying enemy ships. For the broader Pacific theater, it became an understated but crucial lesson in tactics, leadership, and the evolving nature of undersea warfare. The story also speaks to a timeless principle: knowledge shapes destiny. By understanding the habits, expectations, and assumptions of the opponent, one can manipulate outcomes in ways that might initially seem impossible. The ocean does not favor the bold or the cautious alone, it favors the clever. And so, this crazy decoy plan remains a testament to human ingenuity under extreme pressure. It reminds us that in the chaos of war, decisive thought and courage, even when cloaked in apparent recklessness, can change the course of events, and leave history quietly but indelibly altered.